She wrote the truth for someone else, until she took her voice back. The penthouse smelled like eucalyptus and expensive silence. Sloan sat at a glass desk that reflected the skyline in fractured geometry, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard while the city burned gold behind her. She was finishing a chapter titled Radical Presence in a Distracted World, a phrase that would soon be quoted under Tegan Vail's name on curated feeds and embossed bookmarks. Tegan was in the adjacent room recording a meditation reel, her voice soft, breathy, carefully cracked at the edges to simulate vulnerability. Sloan paused, listening. Tegan stumbled over a sentence. She always did when the script ended and improvisation began. There was a faint rustle of cue cards, then a sigh. "We'll cut that." Tegan called to no one in particular. Sloan returned to the document and rewrote the closing paragraph, tightening the cadence, inserting a controlled confession about burnout that never happened, crafting an anecdote about crying on a bathroom floor that belonged to Sloan's own past, but would live forever under another woman's name. She did not hesitate. She had signed away hesitation 2 years ago. The contract lay in a locked drawer 3 feet from her knee. She knew its clauses by memory. The confidentiality section alone ran 9 pages. Any disclosure of authorship would trigger litigation exceeding any projected lifetime earnings. The phrasing was surgical, irrevocable, punitive, exemplary damages. Tegan had smiled when Sloan signed. "It protects the brand," she had said, tapping the table with manicured certainty. "And you like stability, don't you?" Stability meant the penthouse access card, the generous monthly transfer, the apartment downtown paid through a shell company. Stability meant never seeing her bank balance bleed red again. That IT also meant silence, so absolute it felt architectural. Tegan emerged from the studio corner wrapped in ivory silk, phone in hand, eyes scanning metrics in real time. "Engagement dipped last Thursday," she said without greeting. "We need sharper intimacy. More specificity about fear, but not too much to IT has to feel universal." Sloan nodded and opened a new document. Tegan paced. "People crave authenticity, but curated authenticity, we can't alienate sponsors." She stopped behind Sloan's chair and read over her shoulder, absorbing the words as if they were already hers. "Change I was lost till I chose stillness." Lost sounds weak. Stillness sounds intentional. Sloan made the edit. The cursor blinked once, then settled. The transformation was seamless. Tegan leaned down, her reflection hovering over Sloan's in the black screen of a paused tablet. "You understand my voice better than I do." She murmured that IT was not gratitude, that IT was possession. By dusk, the chapter was complete. Tegan recorded it in a single controlled take, reading the rhythm Sloan had engineered. Afterward, she uploaded it to the shared drive labeled Mindful Empire. When Tegan left for a dinner with investors, the penthouse fell quiet except for the hum of climate control. Sloan remained at the desk longer than necessary, staring at the skyline reflected in the glass surface. Her name existed nowhere in the room. NO framed diplomat, NO byline, NO acknowledgement. She had become negative space, shaping a portrait that wasn't hers. Her phone buzzed once. A calendar alert. Rent auto-processed. She exhaled. That was the equation. Rent paid. Medical insurance covered. Student loans shrinking in careful increments. She had told herself anonymity was a temporary bridge, but bridges become foundations if you never cross them. She shut down the laptop and slipped the security badge into her bag. Before leaving, she glanced at the biometric camera above the entrance. Tegan believed in surveillance disguised as safety. Sloan offered the lens a neutral expression and stepped into the elevator. Outside, the air carried the metallic scent of pending rain. She walked 3 blocks before allowing her posture to soften, as if the penthouse itself enforced spinal alignment. The city felt unscripted in comparison to Tegan's curated serenity. Neon flickered. A bus exhaled at the curb. Somewhere, someone argued without branding it as growth. She preferred that rawness. She preferred flaws that were not monetized. The cafe on Mercer was crowded, a spill of late-evening bodies seeking caffeine or refuge. Sloan joined the line and pulled her coat tighter, replaying the day's edits in her mind to ensure no phrase could be traced back to her earlier drafts from years ago. She had learned to fracture her syntax patterns and vary metaphors, ensuring no digital fingerprint remained to link these pages to her own past work. She was mid-thought when she noticed the man ahead of her. His t-shirt bore a stark white quote, "Truth requires friction." She studied the font, bold, unyielding, until he turned, catching her scrutiny. "You disagree?" he asked. "Depends," Sloan said. "Friction produces heat. Heat distorts." The barista called out an order that wasn't his. He didn't look away. "So which are you?" he asked. "Cautious or combustible?" Sloan considered the safe answer and discarded it. "Observant," she said. He smiled, quick and unvarnished. "That's not on the spectrum. It's adjacent." The line moved that he ordered an espresso. She ordered black coffee. When their cups arrived simultaneously, he extended a hand. "Caspian." She hesitated a fraction of a second before taking it. "Sloan." His grip was firm, uncalculated. He studied her as if filing away details for later retrieval. "You analyze slogans for sport?" "Occupational hazard," she said, then regretted the admission. He caught it. "Marketing?" "Something like that." He glanced down at his shirt. "It's from a lecture series on investigative ethics." There was no boast in his tone, only information. "You attend those?" she asked. "I cover them." He tilted his head. "Journalism." The word landed between them with weight. She felt a thin wire tighten beneath her ribs. They stepped aside to let the line breathe. He took a measured sip of espresso. "So tell me," he said, "what's wrong with friction?" She could have disengaged. She could have let the conversation dissolve into polite nods. But the penthouse still clung to her like static. "Nothing," she said, "unless the friction exposes something people profit from keeping smooth." His eyes sharpened again. There it was. Recognition, not of her, but of the terrain. "Exactly," he said quietly. The silence formed. Not awkward, but charged with mutual appraisal. He checked his watch, then surprised himself by ignoring whatever appointment waited. "I'm writing something about constructed narratives," he said. "Public figures who outsource authenticity." The wire inside her tightened further. "That sounds messy." "It should be." He watched her reaction. She offered none. "Mess is honest," he added. "Polish hides labor." A laugh escaped her before she could contain it, but he noticed. "You disagree?" "No," she said. "I just think people underestimate how much labor goes into polish." Their cups were empty before either realized. They had circled theory without revealing allegiance. He glanced toward the door. "I'm headed that way," he said. "Walk." It was a neutral invitation, light enough to refuse. She calculated risk. Exposure minimal, no shared last names, no overlapping public footprints. She nodded. Outside, the first drops of rain traced faint paths down the pavement. They walked without choreography, matching pace instinctively. He spoke about a recent piece he had published dismantling a startup that fabricated user testimonials. She countered with structural critiques about narrative framing. He listened rather than waiting to respond. When he challenged her, it was direct, never patronizing. She felt something unfamiliar, the absence of performance. With him, she did not have to calibrate. Vulnerability for brand cohesion. She could disagree without editing herself for marketability. At the corner where their paths diverged, he stopped. "You never answered," he said. "Cautious or combustible?" She looked at the rain gathering on his collar. "Depends who's holding the match." He held her gaze a beat longer than necessary, then nodded once. "Coffee again," he said, not phrased as a question. She considered the penthouse cameras, the contract drawer, the carefully constructed invisibility. "All right," she said. The word felt like a small fracture in a polished surface. He smiled, satisfied not with conquest, but with continuation. Then he turned and disappeared into the wet shimmer of traffic. Sloan stood still for a moment, rain soaking through fabric, pulse unsettled. Point 2. Years of manufactured intimacy had led to this, a fluorescent-lit cafe line where the script finally failed. Friction hadn't just found her. It had started to burn. The second time Sloan met Caspian, it was not accidental. He texted a time and a place with efficient brevity, no emojis, no performative charm. Just coordinates. She appreciated that. They chose a narrow restaurant with exposed brick and tables close enough to overhear ambition in neighboring conversations. Sloan arrived first, scanning exits out of habit rather than fear. When he walked in, he spotted her immediately, as if he had already mapped her posture into memory. He sat without ceremony. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about polish." She folded her hands loosely. "That's either flattering or dangerous." Probably both, he said. Dinner unfolded without small talk as filler. He asked what she edited. She answered ingredients. Personal essays, long-form thought pieces, brand-aligned manuscripts. She avoided names he didn't press yet. He described his current investigation in abstract terms. A public figure who had built a multi-million-dollar empire on vulnerability while allegedly outsourcing the vulnerability itself. Ghost-stricken inspiration, he said. Factories of curated confession. The phrase hit too close to architecture. She kept her breathing steady. That's common, she replied. Celebrities use collaborators. Collaboration implies credit, he countered. This is erasure. He watched her carefully when he said it. She held his gaze. What's your angle? She asked. Fraud? Not legally, he said. Morally, and possibly contractually abusive. He took a sip of wine. There are NDAs designed less for protection and more for intimidation. The wire tightened again that he wasn't guessing that he had sources. You sound certain, she said. I've interviewed 2 former assistants, he replied. Both described a system where the voice of the brand is manufactured by underpaid writers who sign contracts that would bankrupt them if they speak. He paused. One of them mentioned a primary architect, he said, his voice dropping. Someone whose absence would trigger a total brand collapse. Sloan forced her hand to remain steady. Office myths, she said. They tend to grow when the reality is boring. True, he conceded, but patterns do. He leaned back. The figure I'm investigating built her persona on radical transparency. She preaches self-trust while legally binding others into silence. That contradiction interests me. He didn't say the name, but it hovered between them like a watermark. Tegan Vail. Sloan felt heat under her collarbone. Not panic, but the recognition of proximity. She had known intellectually that someone might eventually question the machinery behind Tegan's empire. She had not expected to be sharing bread with the man assembling the questions. Investigative pieces like that can backfire, she said carefully. If you miss one verification, your credibility burns. He smiled faintly. Friction, remember? Combustion, she corrected. Right, he said. But I don't publish unless it's airtight. He met her eyes. I don't ruin people casually. That line lodged somewhere complicated inside her. He believed himself ethical. He believed exposure was purification. She wondered what he would believe if he knew she was the architecture he wanted to demolish. The server refilled their glasses. Sloan declined more wine. She needed clarity. What if your source is lying? She asked. Or projecting? Then I don't print, he said simply. I corroborate. And if the ghostwriter signed willingly? Consent under financial coercion isn't clean, he replied without hesitation. Silence settled, heavier this time. She realized she was no longer debating theory. She was testing the perimeter of her own cage. He misread her pause as skepticism. Look, he said, I'm not crusading for sport, that I've seen contracts that function like leashes. If someone is being exploited, they deserve an exit. The word exit pulsed in her mind like a forbidden door. She imagined the drawer in the penthouse, the biometric camera, the automatic rent payment. Exits have costs, she said. So does staying, he answered. He shifted topics deliberately. Perhaps sensing tension, he asked about her background. She offered fragments. Scholarship kid, freelance years, near eviction before landing a stable client. That he nodded, absorbing the data without pity. Stability can be seductive, he said, especially after chaos. She recognized the statement as personal, not probing. And you? She asked. He described internships that paid in exposure instead of money. A father who measured worth in risk avoided rather than risks taken. He had chosen the opposite path. He pursued stories that threatened comfort, because comfort felt like slow suffocation. When dessert menus arrived, neither reached for one. They had crossed into terrain too charged for sweetness. He checked his phone briefly, then locked it face down. I'll be honest, he said. The figure I'm investigating is close to publishing another book. If I'm right, it's not hers. Her pulse thudded once, sharp. And if you're wrong? She asked. Then I retract publicly, he said. Transparency cuts both ways. He held her gaze. But I don't think I'm wrong. She imagined the manuscript she had delivered that morning. Chapter 12 was hers down to the bone. The anecdote about the bathroom floor belonged to her 23-year-old self. He would call it fabricated vulnerability. He wouldn't see the private theft embedded within it. When will you publish? She asked. 3 weeks, he said. I'm lining up confirmation. 3 weeks. She calculated pages remaining. Deadlines. She calculated how long it would take Tegan to detect proximity if Sloan appeared in photographs beside a journalist known for dismantling lifestyle brands. Be careful, she said, the warning slipping out before she could dress it as neutrality. He tilted his head. About narratives, she said. They bite back. He didn't flinch. So do I. It wasn't bravado that it was a statement of identity. The check arrived. He reached for it. She intercepted with equal speed. Split, she said. I don't do debts. He studied her for a fraction longer than politeness required, then nodded. Split. Outside. The rain had cleared, leaving the pavement reflective and slick. They walked slower this time. Conversation less combative, more exploratory. He asked what she read when no one was paying her. She named poets who wrote about erasure without self-pity. He listened, as if collecting coordinates again. At the subway entrance, he stopped. I meant what I said, he told her. If someone's trapped in one of these contracts, I'll protect them. The word protect felt dangerously close to promise. She wondered whether he understood how protection could resemble exposure depending on where you stood. You assume they want saving, she said quietly. Everyone wants a voice, he replied. Not everyone can afford one, she answered. The train roared beneath them, wind rushing up the stairs. She stepped back first. 3 weeks is ambitious, she said. Ambition built my career, he replied. She almost said ambition built Tegan's as well, but swallowed it. Good night, Caspian. Good night, Sloan. He didn't try to touch her. She descended into the station, the sound of metal grinding against metal filling the air like a warning. On the ride home, she opened her phone and searched his byline. She knew his reputation before finishing the first article. Methodical, uncompromising, occasionally polarizing. He had exposed a wellness startup for falsified clinical data. He had dismantled a charity funneling donations into executive bonuses. He did not miss details. She closed the browser and cleared the search history automatically. Muscle memory born from living inside someone else's brand. When she reached her apartment, she stood in the dark without turning on the lights. Stability hummed around her in the form of paid utilities and silent walls. But 3 weeks had just acquired a countdown. She understood the geometry now. If he proved Tegan fraudulent, the blast radius would include her. That if he failed, he would burn. And somewhere in that equation, she would be forced to choose between remaining invisible and becoming combustible. The third time they met, it was deliberate and unguarded. Caspian chose a bookstore cafe uptown, quieter, less performative than Mercered, exposed bricked, curated Edison bulbs. Just shelves that smelled like paper and patience. Sloan arrived with a manuscript draft in her bag, the weight of it pressing against her hip like contraband. She had told Tegan she needed ambient noise to polish the final chapters. Tegan approved with a distracted wave, already rehearsing gratitude for readers she would never truly meet. Caspian was seated cross-legged in a wooden chair, notebook open, pen idled. He looked up when she approached, and the recognition in his expression was immediate and unfiltered. He did not scan her outfit for signals. He did not measure her for advantage. He simply smiled. You came, he said. You asked, she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. They spoke first about neutral things, books miscategorized, essays that overstayed their metaphors. Then the neutrality thinned. I spoke to another source, he said quietly, a former copy editor from the publishing house. Sloan kept her gaze steady, and she confirmed structural similarities across multiple books, same cadence, same rhetorical architecture. He tapped the notebook. It's like hearing the same composer under different singers. Her pulse flickered. She had designed that architecture. She had believed variation was camouflage. Patterns can be coincidence, she said. Not at that scale, he replied. He wasn't accusatory, he was assembling. She could see it in the way he mapped information without rushing to conclusion. I'm close, he said. One more confirmation, and it's solid. She imagined Tegan's penthouse, the biometric camera, the drawer with the contract. She imagined the clause about reputational sabotage. If she were identified as a source, even anonymously, Tegan would trace it back through proximity. She would freeze the apartment. She would litigate without blinking. You look like you're solving an equation, Caspian observed. Maybe I am, she said. Variables? Risk versus consequence. He leaned back. That's my daily math. And you always choose risk. If the consequence of silence is worse. The simplicity of his answer irritated her because it ignored nuance. He could afford principle. His name was on his work. If he fell publicly. She would disappear without acknowledgement. A group of students laughed near the philosophy section. The sound cut through the tension briefly. Caspian studied her again, this time with a different focus. You're too invested in this, he said, for someone who claims it's theoretical. There it was. The first crack. She could deflect. She could lie cleanly. She chose a middle path. I've worked around people like that, she admitted. Brands built on borrowed intimacy. And, he prompted. And it's rarely symmetrical, she said. The face gets praise, the labor gets a wire transfer. He didn't interrupt, she continued. Sometimes the labor prefers the wire. Because they're paid well? He asked. Because they're safe, she corrected. He absorbed that. Safety isn't neutral, he said. It can be engineered. So can martyrdom, she replied. Their eyes locked, not adversarial, but sharpened. He wasn't debating for sport anymore. He was testing whether she was adjacent to the story or inside it. Her phone vibrated on the table. She flipped it over instinctively before reading the notification. Tegan, need you back by 6. Revisions on Chapter 14. As she typed a quick acknowledgement and locked the screen. Caspian noticed the micro-tension in her jaw. Demanding client? He asked. Structured, she said. Structured people don't like unpredictability. He nodded slowly. Neither do I. They moved from analysis to something more personal with surprising ease. He told her about the first story he ever killed because it lacked proof. He had cried in a bathroom stall, not from shame, but from restraint. Publishing half-truths is still lying, he said. She almost laughed at the symmetry. The bathroom floor anecdote she had written for Tegan was a fabrication layered over a real memory. She wondered what he would think if he knew she had monetized her own breakdown under someone else's name. Hours passed unnoticed. The cafe lights shifted warmer as afternoon leaned toward evening. Sloan felt an unfamiliar lightness when she spoke to him. No modulation of vocabulary to fit a brand voice. And no trimming of sharp edges to maintain sponsor appeal. She disagreed openly. He countered without condescension. When she challenged his assumption about audience appetite for scandal, he adjusted rather than dismissed. You'd make a ruthless editor, he said. I am. She almost answered. She swallowed the confession. As they packed their things, he hesitated. I want to show you something, he said. He opened his notebook and turned it toward her. A rough outline of the article stared back at her. Section headings mapped the dismantling of Tegan's empire without naming it directly yet. Constructed vulnerability, contractual silence, the economics of borrowed voice. Her breath stalled only for a second. She forced it steady. You're confident, she said. Confidence follows evidence, he replied. He tapped a blank line near the end. What I'm missing is the central witness, the one who writes. The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. She could tell him now. She could detonate everything in a whisper. But revelation without strategy would be suicide. Tegan would sue before sunrise. She would bury Sloan in injunctions. And if that person never steps forward, she asked, then I publish with what I have, he said. But it won't be complete. He met her eyes. Truth deserves completeness. Outside, dusk folded over the street in muted violet. They walked without touching, yet the air between them felt charged with proximity. You trust me? He asked suddenly. The question was too direct. She considered deflecting again. She didn't. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He accepted that without offense. Fair, he said. Trust isn't a slogan. At her building entrance, she stopped. He glanced up at the facade. Unremarkable, ordinary. Dinner tomorrow? He asked. She calculated Tegan's schedule. Investor brunch in the morning, podcast recording at noon, evening live stream. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. He smiled, then paused. Sloan, he added. If you're closer to this than you're saying, be careful. The warning wasn't investigative. It was personal. She nodded once and entered the building. Inside her apartment, she locked the door and leaned against it. The manuscript draft slid from her bag onto the floor. She picked it up and flipped to Chapter 14. The bathroom floor scene stared back at her in elegant typography. She crossed out a line with a pen, then another. She imagined her name on the cover, Imagine the silence that would follow publication if she chose exposure. She opened her laptop and cleared the browser history from earlier that afternoon. She deleted the cafe selfie Caspian had sent her, an accidental reflection of them in the bookstore window. She emptied the trash. She was erasing evidence of something real while manufacturing intimacy for millions of strangers. Her phone buzzed again. Tegan, remember, the brand is clarity, no distractions. Sloan typed back. Of course. Then she placed the phone face down on the table and stared at the manuscript until the words blurred. She understood the geometry tightening around her. Tegan held the contract. Caspian held the match. She stood between them, paid to remain silent, pulled toward combustion. Tegan never raised her voice when she sensed a threat. She refined it. The penthouse felt exposed that morning. Tegan didn't look up from her tablet when Sloan entered. She simply rotated the screen to show a grainy capture from the bookstore's security feed. Sit, Tegan said. It wasn't an invitation. The tablet rotated across the counter. A paused image filled the screen. The reflection of two figures in a bookstore window. Not perfectly clear, not incriminating on its own, but identifiable if you knew where to look. Caspian's profile. Her posture. Tegan tapped the screen once. You've been busy. Sloan measured her breathing. It's a bookstore. It's a journalist, Tegan corrected. There was no accusation in her tone, no hysteria. Just data delivered cleanly. Sloan understood immediately. Surveillance disguised as security. The cafe had been outside camera range. The bookstore had not. You have cameras on public sidewalks now? Sloan asked evenly. I have assistants who monitor patterns, Tegan replied. You forget that I built this empire on observation. She stood, moving with controlled grace. Caspian Morrow. She pronounced the name without hesitation. Investigative. History of dismantling lifestyle brands. Sloan didn't react. She couldn't afford to. Tegan leaned back against the counter. He's preparing something. Journalists prepare constantly, Sloan said. Yes, Tegan agreed. But not all of them request archival metadata from publishing houses. She let that settle. He's close. The word was precise. Sloan kept her face neutral. Close to what? To a narrative that would inconvenience me. Tegan's eyes sharpened. And inconvenience you far more. There it was. The shift from observation to leverage. Tegan walked toward the glass desk and opened the locked drawer. She withdrew a slim folder and placed it between them. The contract. Sloan didn't need to open it to feel the weight of its clauses. You signed willingly, Tegan said. You were compensated generously. You continue to be. Compensation doesn't equal authorship, Sloan replied quietly. Tegan smiled faintly. Authorship is perception. Perception is mine. Silence thickened. Tegan tapped the folder. Here is what will happen. You will continue seeing him. The instruction was so unexpected Sloan blinked. You want me to? I want him fed, Tegan corrected. Misdirected, he's building a structure that lets adjust the foundation. Sloan understood immediately. Disinformation, engineered leaks. No, she said before she could soften it. Tegan's expression didn't change. You misunderstand. You don't have the luxury of refusal. She opened the folder and flipped to a marked page. Clause 14. Reputational sabotage. Any association that results in brand damage permits asset reclamation. She met Sloan's eyes. The apartment is technically leased through my holding company. The air shifted. Sloan had known this abstractly. She had not expected it weaponized. You'd evict me? I would enforce boundaries, Tegan replied calmly, and pursue damages for breach of confidentiality. Sloan felt anger rise, sharp but contained. I've never disclosed anything. Not yet, Tegan said. But proximity creates risk. You will reduce that risk by becoming useful. Tegan moved to the kitchen island and poured 2 glasses of water as if negotiating a sponsorship deal. You will confirm his suspicions selectively. You will give him enough detail to feel validated. Structural similarities to late-night editing schedules. An unnamed senior writer who left abruptly. She handed Sloan a glass. And then you will provide one critical document that is false but plausible. Sloan didn't take the water. A fabricated draft. A modified one, Tegan said, something that implies authorship theft from a non-existent third party. To discredit him, Sloan finished. To discredit his methodology, Tegan corrected. If he publishes inaccurate documentation, his credibility fractures. Sloan saw the full geometry now. Caspian relied on airtight evidence. If one piece collapsed, the rest would be suspect. Tegan wasn't planning to deny. She was planning to let him hang himself. "You're asking me to destroy someone's career," Sloan said. "I'm asking you to protect your own," Tegan replied. The distinction felt obscene. Sloan looked at the manuscript on the counter. Chapter 14, or her breakdown rewritten as Tegan's revelation. She imagined Caspian reading it, dissecting cadence, unaware the true author stood beside him at dinner. "And if I refuse?" Tegan didn't hesitate. "Then I activate the legal team, that you'll spend years in court, that you'll lose the apartment, that you'll be known in publishing circles as unstable and litigious. No one hires unstable litigants." The threat wasn't loud. It was infrastructural. Sloan understood infrastructure. She had been reinforcing Tegan's for 2 years. "You underestimate him," Sloan said quietly. "If he senses manipulation." "He won't," Tegan interrupted. "Because you'll be convincing." A beat passed. Tegan's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You're talented, Sloan. That's why you're here. But talent without leverage is expendable. Don't confuse personal attachment with strategic importance." The words landed precisely where intended. Personal attachment. Sloan kept her expression neutral. She refused to let Tegan see the fracture. "What do you want first?" Sloan asked. Tegan's smile returned, subtle and satisfied. "A conversation where you confirm that I struggle to draft spontaneously, that I rely heavily on editorial structuring, true enough to anchor belief. Then next week, I'll provide the document." Sloan nodded once. It was an agreement. It was acknowledgement of the trap. Tegan closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer. "Good," she said. "Clarity is kindness." Sloan almost laughed at the slogan. She gathered the manuscript and moved toward the desk. "Chapter 14 is tightened," she said evenly. "The vulnerability reads controlled." "Excellent," Tegan replied. "Readers love pain if it's curated." The meeting ended without further discussion. No raised voices, no dramatic ultimatums. Just a strategic directive delivered like routine brand management. When Sloan stepped into the elevator, her pulse accelerated for the first time. She wasn't panicking. She was recalculating. She could comply partially. She could warn Caspian indirectly. She could attempt to outmaneuver Tegan's narrative architecture, but every path required precision. Her phone buzzed as she reached the lobby. "Caspian, dinner at 8, that's still good?" She stared at the message longer than necessary, then typed, "Yes." The word felt different this time. Not curiosity, not tentative possibility. It felt like stepping onto a wire suspended between two buildings. She had been instructed to feed him misinformation, become the instrument of his collapse. Outside, the city moved without awareness of private wars. She walked toward the subway, mind racing through contingencies. That if she gave him nothing, Tegan would escalate. If she gave him everything, she would detonate herself. If she gave him something altered, she might buy time. Time for what? That was the question tightening around her ribs. She had spent years building Tegan's voice. Now, she was being forced to use her own as a silencer. She would sit across from a man who believed in friction as purification, and she would begin, deliberately, to blur the line between truth and strategy. Dinner did not feel like dinner. It felt like surveillance with candles. Caspian chose a small place near the river, dim lighting, close tables, the kind of setting where conversations lowered instinctively. Sloan arrived composed, posture neutral, pulse controlled. She had rehearsed nothing. Rehearsal would show. She needed the truth, edited, not fabricated. He stood when she approached. "You look like you've made a decision," he said instead of hello. "I have," she replied. Saturday the waiter poured water and disappeared. Caspian studied her without pressing. "You're closer to the story," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered. No drama. No build-up. The admission hung between them, clean and dangerous. "How close?" he asked. "Close enough to know you're not wrong," she said. His jaw tightened, not in triumph, but in confirmation. "You work inside the machine." "Yes." He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He waited. "She doesn't draft alone," Sloan said carefully. "She outlines verbally. I structure. I build narrative arcs. I refine cadence. She reviews. She records." He absorbed every word. "So the voice is engineered," she finished, "but not stolen." She knows what she wants to sound like. She just can't execute it consistently. That distinction mattered to Sloan. She would not let the truth be distorted into caricature. Are there others? He asked. Assistants, copy editors, no primary writer besides me. The word me slipped out without permission. Silence followed. He didn't react immediately. He was too disciplined for that. You're the composer, he said finally. She held his gaze. Yes. There it was, the center of the labyrinth. He exhaled slowly. Why sign? Because I was broke, she said flatly. Because rent is louder than pride. Because contracts don't look like cages until you're inside them. He nodded once. No judgment, just recognition. Are you being coerced? Legally contained, she corrected. The contract is airtight. Confidentiality clauses. Asset leverage. Asset leverage? The apartment is tied to her holding company. Understanding sharpened his expression. She owns your housing. She owns the conditions, Sloan said. A muscle in his jaw flickered. That he wasn't angry at her, he was mapping power. She knows about me, Sloan added. That shifted the temperature. How? She monitors patterns. She knows you're investigating. And she wants me to feed you. The word landed heavy. Feed me what? Selective truth, structural confirmation, enough to keep you confident. And then, a document, modified, plausible, but false. He leaned back slowly, processing. The candlelight caught the tension in his eyes. To discredit me. Yes. He didn't speak for several seconds. The restaurant noise continued around them. Oblivious, he looked at her, not past her. Are you going to? The question was direct. No rhetoric. No shield. I don't know, she said honestly. It was the first unstrategic sentence of the night. He studied her face for signs of performance. There were none. She had stripped those away. If you give me a false document and I publish it, he said evenly, my career fractures. I know. If you refuse her, he continued, yours collapses. Yes. The symmetry lay exposed between them. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare break in composure. You understand that if I move forward without you, she still burns. She'll survive, Sloan said. Brands like hers pivot. She'll claim collaboration. She'll reframe. And you? I won't. That was the difference. That he could withstand a failed article. She could not withstand litigation engineered by someone with deeper pockets. He leaned forward again. Why tell me this? Because you asked for truth, she said. And because if I'm going to lie to you, I needed to see your face first. The honesty was brutal. That he didn't flinch. Do you want out? He asked quietly. The question pierced deeper than she expected. She imagined the drawer, the contract, the camera, the constant editing of her own instincts. Yes, she said. Then we don't play her game. You don't get to decide that alone, she replied. No, he agreed. We decide. That word unsettled her more than any threat. He pulled his notebook from his jacket but didn't open it. What's the false document supposed to imply? That she stole from another ghostwriter, a fabricated predecessor. He almost smiled. Not amusement, but appreciation of strategy. So she plans to concede authorship outsourcing while redirecting blame. Exactly. And if I verify that Ghostwriter doesn't exist, she'll say you relied on anonymous rumor. She'll question your sourcing discipline. He nodded slowly. Elegant. She's precise, Sloan said. So are you, he replied. The waiter returned. They ordered mechanically. Neither tasted the food. You said she can't draft spontaneously, he said after a moment. Is there proof? Yes. Recordings? Yes. Draft files with metadata? Yes. The word yes felt like stepping closer to an edge. Why haven't you walked away already? Because walking away isn't silent, she said. It's expensive. He reached across the table but stopped short of touching her. If you give me verifiable evidence, not planted, not altered, I can protect you. She shook her head slightly. You can publish. You can't shield me from her legal team. I can expose coercion. And she'll sue anyway. Silence returned, heavier than before. Finally he spoke, voice steady. If you choose to give me the modified document, tell me in advance. She looked up sharply. Why? So I don't use it. That wasn't what she expected. You'd risk losing the story? I won't build on rot, he said simply. Even if it costs me. The statement lodged somewhere deep. She believed him. That made everything harder. Her phone buzzed on the table. Tegan, remember, clarity. Sloan flipped it face down again. She's checking, he asked. She always checks. He sat back, decision forming behind his eyes. Then we move before she does. How? You gather real proof, not copies she provides, original drafts, recordings, contracts. That's breach. That's survival, he countered. She felt the wire beneath her feet tighten further. She had entered dinner prepared to manipulate him strategically. Instead, she had given him the center of the truth. You're asking me to burn everything, she said. I'm asking you to stop being fuel, he replied. The bill arrived unnoticed that he paid this time. She didn't argue. Outside, the river reflected city lights in fractured lines. They stood close, but didn't touch. 3 weeks, he said. That's my window. She'll move sooner if she senses hesitation, Sloan replied. Then hesitation ends tonight. She met his eyes. There was no romantic softness there now. Just alignment under pressure. Give me time, she said. I need to see the contract again. He nodded. But don't wait too long. Because delay favored Tegan. They parted without goodbye theatrics, no kiss, no promise. Just shared knowledge of the storm forming. As Sloan walked home, she understood the board had shifted. She was no longer merely protecting herself. She was choosing between engineered safety and deliberate collapse. Tegan expected obedience. Caspian expected integrity. For the first time in 2 years, the choice felt less like fear and more like direction. She just hadn't decided which direction would cost her more. Tegan moved faster than anticipated. The invitation arrived the next morning, gold-embossed, minimalist, strategic. A private pre-launch soiree celebrating the upcoming release of her new book. Influencers, editors, podcast hosts, select journalists, including Caspian. Sloan held the card in her apartment kitchen, pulse steady but colder than before. This wasn't coincidence that IT was choreography. Her phone rang. Tegan. You'll attend, Tegan said without greeting. You'll stay near me, and you'll send him the file tonight. The modified draft? Sloan asked. Yes. A pause. He'll use it that he's ambitious. Ambition accelerates oversight. Sloan stared at the window. The city looked ordinary, unaware of staged detonations. And if he doesn't, he will, Tegan replied calmly. You underestimate how badly people want a clean villain. The call ended. Sloan stood motionless for several seconds. Then she opened her laptop and accessed the shared drive. Tegan had already uploaded the file. Title: early_manuscript_predecessor.docs. The fabrication was meticulous, metadata adjusted, version history trimmed. The voice similar enough to Sloan's structural style to feel authentic, but distinct enough to suggest another author. She scanned it quickly. It was convincing. She closed it without downloading. Instead, she opened a hidden external drive from her desk drawer. She hadn't used it in months. It contained archived drafts Tegan had dictated verbally before Sloan structured them. Raw audio files, timestamped, edited iterations showing evolution from scattered notes to polished prose. If exposed, the authorship gap would be undeniable. Possessing them was already risky. Transferring them would be irreversible. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Caspian. Any movement? She typed nothing. At noon, she returned to the penthouse. Tegan was serene, reviewing floral arrangements for the event. Black and white, she said to the planner. Contrast photographs better. She dismissed the staff when Sloan entered. The document? Tegan asked. I'll send it tonight, Sloan replied evenly. Tegan studied her face for microreactions. There were none. Good that you'll CC him from an encrypted address. Use the one I created. There it was, control layered over control, Sloan nodded. And Sloan, Tegan added lightly. Remember that narrative timing matters. If he publishes too early, we respond. That if he waits, we escalate. You've planned contingencies, Sloan said. I always do. The conversation ended like a board meeting. No raised volume. No visible threat. The threat was systemic. That evening, Sloan sat alone in her apartment with both drives open on her screen. On the left, Tegan's planted document, but on the right, years of raw proof. She imagined 2 futures. In the first, she forwarded the modified file. Caspian trusted it. Published. The error surfaced. Tegan dismantled him publicly. Sloan remained protected but permanently complicit. In the second, she refused to cooperate. Tegan activated litigation. Sloan lost housing, income, professional standing. But the truth surfaced intact. There was no third option. Not anymore. Her phone lit up again. Caspian calling. She answered. She invited me. He said without preamble. The party. I know. She wants proximity. She wants spectacle, Sloan corrected. A beat. Is the file coming? He asked quietly. She closed her eyes. Yes. Silence. Is it clean? He asked. Another silence. This one decisive. No, she said. He exhaled slowly. Not surprise. Relief. Then don't send it. She'll know. Let her, he replied. We move first. Her pulse accelerated. If I give you the originals, everything, it's nuclear. I won't publish recklessly, he said. I'll verify independently, but I need primary proof. She looked at the external drive again, the audio files, the early drafts, her invisible fingerprints everywhere. She owns my apartment, Sloan said quietly. She doesn't own your voice, he answered. The line landed with more force than any argument. I need 1 hour, she said. Take it. She ended the call and disconnected from Wi-Fi. She copied the entire archive onto a secure cloud link under an anonymous account. She triple-checked metadata to ensure authenticity, NO alterations, NO trimming to NO performance. Then she attached the link to a new encrypted email, not Tegan's controlled address, her own. Subject, primary materials. She hesitated only once before pressing send. The file transferred. Irreversible. Seconds later, her phone vibrated. Tegan. Sloan let it ring twice before answering. You didn't send the document, Tegan said calmly. No, Sloan replied. A pause, thin as glass. Explain. I won't fabricate evidence, Sloan said. Not for you. Silence expanded. You misunderstand leverage, Tegan said softly. You are contractually bound. Yes, Sloan agreed. And so are you. Another pause, longer this time. What have you done? I sent him the originals, Sloan said. The stillness on the other end shifted from calculation to recognition. That was unwise, Tegan said. It was accurate, Sloan replied. You think he can protect you? No, Sloan said. I think the truth can. The line went dead. Sloan stood in the center of her apartment, heartbeat loud but steady. She had just detonated the only stability she possessed. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Caspian. Received. I'll verify tonight. Whatever happens next, we control it. Control was an illusion, but direction wasn't. Across the city, Tegan was already mobilizing lawyers, publicists, damage forecasts. In less than 48 hours, there would be a party filled with curated smiles and controlled lighting. And somewhere between champagne flutes and strategic applause, one narrative would collapse. Sloan understood now. There was no going back to invisibility. She had stepped fully into friction. The penthouse glowed like a controlled constellation. Black and white florals, crystal glassware, polished surfaces reflecting curated serenity. The pre-launch soiree was calibrated for photographs before guests even arrived. Sloan stood near the panoramic windows in a simple black dress. Elegant, unbranded, unmemorable by design. Tegan moved through the room like a conductor, greeting investors with measured warmth, influencers with calibrated intimacy. Every laugh was placed, every touch intentional. Caspian arrived 20 minutes after the official start. He wore a dark suit, no tie. Expression unreadable. He did not scan the room for spectacle, he scanned for structure. His gaze found Sloan almost immediately, an ONOD, NO signal. Just acknowledgement. Tegan noticed. She approached him first, smile precise. Caspian Moro, correct? Vail? He replied evenly. Congratulations on the launch. Thank you. I value critical minds and celebratory spaces. I value transparency in curated ones, he said. The exchange was smooth enough to pass as banter to anyone listening. Sloan felt the tension like static in the air. Tegan gestured toward a small semicircle forming near the central lounge. We're about to share a preview excerpt, she announced lightly. Stay. Cameras angled subtly. Phones lifted. Sloan understood the choreography. This was escalation. Tegan stepped onto the low platform near the marble fireplace. Before we celebrate, she said, I want to address something interesting. The room quieted, not confused, but intrigued. There have been inquiries, Tegan continued, about my writing process. She smiled, soft and self-aware. Speculation that no one writes alone. Light laughter from the crowd. Caspian didn't smile. Tegan gestured toward Sloan. This is Sloan. She's part of my editorial team. Dozens of eyes turned. Sloan felt the weight, but didn't move. I believe in collaboration, Tegan continued, in shared brilliance, but I also believe in truth. She lifted a tablet. An investigative journalist recently approached us with claims of hidden authorship and coercion. There it was no name yet, but the aim was precise. Tegan tapped the screen. We provided documentation. Sloan's pulse spiked. That wasn't possible. Caspian hadn't published. Tegan turned the tablet outward. On the large projection behind her appeared the modified document, the fabricated predecessor draft. A murmur rippled through the room. This early manuscript, Tegan said calmly, was written by a contracted writer years ago. The arrangement ended amicably. The structure evolved. But to imply theft or deception is irresponsible. Sloan's stomach dropped. Tegan had moved first. She hadn't waited for publication. She had preempted it. Caspian stepped forward slightly. That document doesn't. Tegan raised a hand gently. Caspian reached out regarding allegations based on incomplete sourcing. Her tone remained composed. We invited him here tonight for transparency. The room's attention shifted fully now. Phones angled. Cameras zoomed. Caspian, Tegan continued smoothly. Would you like to clarify your position? It was a trap constructed in plain sight. If he denied involvement, he appeared evasive. If he admitted investigation, he looked reckless. He met her gaze without flinching. I haven't published anything, he said. Because verification matters. Exactly, Tegan replied warmly. Verification. She tapped the tablet again. The document you referenced in your inquiry appears to be misinterpreted. Sloan understood the move. Tegan was framing him as premature, speculative, careless. She had publicly acknowledged outsourcing just enough to neutralize scandal while undermining his methodology. Caspian turned slightly toward Sloan. The look lasted less than a second, but it asked everything. She held his gaze. He realized it instantly. The document on the screen was not from him. Tegan had leaked her own fabrication before he could act. Did you receive this file from an anonymous source? Tegan asked lightly. I received multiple materials, he replied carefully. None published. Yet, she said. A faint undercurrent of tension ran through the crowd. Now it felt like theater. Tegan smiled at the audience. In the age of click-driven journalism, it's easy to chase shadows. That I'm grateful for due diligence. Soft applause followed, not enthusiastic, but polite. Caspian's editor stood near the back, expression tight. Sloan saw him checking his phone repeatedly. The optics were turning fast. Tegan shifted tone. I've never claimed to write alone. Creativity is communal. What I reject is the narrative of exploitation. She looked directly at Sloan. My team is compensated generously and voluntarily. The spotlight moved. Sloan felt heat rise under her skin. This was the moment. She could remain silent. She could confirm. Tegan expected compliance. Sloan, Tegan said gently. Would you like to say something? The room stilled. Caspian didn't move. That he didn't signal that he didn't save her. Because this wasn't his move. It was hers. Sloan stepped forward slowly. She didn't look at Tegan. She looked at the audience. I structure the books, she said clearly. From raw recordings to final draft. A ripple passed through the room. Tegan's smile held, but thinner now. And are you coerced? Tegan asked lightly, as if indulging curiosity. No, Sloan said. A flicker of confusion. But the contract is punitive, she continued evenly, designed to silence attribution. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Caspian's editor stopped typing. Tegan's posture remained elegant. Confidentiality protects intellectual property, she said smoothly. Confidentiality can also erase authorship, Sloan replied. Phones were no longer angled casually. They were recording. Tegan's composure fractured for the first time. You signed a contract, Sloan. You're here by choice. Sloan stepped closer to the microphone. Consent under financial coercion isn't choice, she said, throwing Caspian's own words back into the room. It's a lease on a soul. The phrase detonated more quietly than shouting, but more effectively. Caspian stepped forward now, voice steady. I have verified primary drafts and audio files demonstrating structural authorship. Gasps, not loud but real. Tegan turned to him slowly. If you publish private materials obtained in breach of contract, she said, You will face legal consequences. I expect that, he replied. The room had stopped pretending this was celebration. It was fracture in real time. Tegan recalibrated instantly. She faced the audience again. Transparency matters that I will review all internal agreements publicly. She smiled, controlled, because I have nothing to hide. It was a pivot, a temporary one. But the illusion had cracked. The applause this time was uncertain, scattered. Sloan stepped back from the platform. Her hands were steady. She had not delivered everything, but she had refused to be a prop. Caspian met her eyes across the room. This time there was no question in his expression, only understanding. Tegan continued speaking, voice calm, reclaiming tone, reframing narrative. But the shift had already occurred. The brand was no longer seamless. There was visible stitching. Within minutes, notifications began flooding phones across the room, social feeds updating, clips uploading, live commentary forming. The evening that was meant to solidify control had instead introduced doubt. And doubt, once public, could not be fully contained. Sloan knew what would follow: legal threats, eviction, notices. She would lose the apartment. She would lose income. She might lose employability. But she had stepped out of invisibility in front of witnesses. And that could not be undone. The fallout was immediate. As Tegan's legal team mobilized, the counteroffensive of original drafts and audio logs proved insurmountable, forcing the publishing house to void Sloan's restrictive clauses under public pressure. Weeks later, the penthouse was a memory of sterile air. Sloan sat in a room that smelled of cheap coffee and unfiltered sunlight. She wasn't repairing a brand. She was reclaiming a voice. On the title page of the new manuscript, the byline sat solitary and sharp: by Sloan.